All right, welcome everyone. This is our third in a series of community lectures hosted by Anne Arundel Bird Club. Um, we're real happy to have Maren Gimpel with us tonight, but I do have a couple things to do first. In the last newsletter that came out, I had asked people to, or maybe it was just an email to everybody, to consider doing a backyard virtual tour. I have two to show you tonight, so maybe that'll help inspire you uh, to do your own. So let me get started. And these are 2.5 and 3.5 minutes long, so not too long. Marilyn Taylor uh,
Mm.
did a real nice one to show probably the most effective use of only being allowed to use one pole for a bird feeder. So let me, okay, get it started and pause it. How do I pause it? Wait. Okay. This is always the issue. How do I get it somewhere else? Technology is killing me. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Where'd it go? Guess it's that one. All right, see if I can get this to work. All right, is everybody hopefully seeing that? Hasn't started yet.
I see it.
I can see it.
Oh, wait. I forgot I have to share my, okay. The little things.
Nice dipper in her backyard.
Yeah, really. Speaking of lots of
That's a
water.
good. That's a good bird for Maryland.
Okay, share computer
No,
sound. There I go. Do that. All right, give it a go again here.
Is there audio?
Is nobody hearing that?
No.
no.
Oh, my. Yeah, there is audio. I shared my computer audio. Oh. All right. Let's try one more time. And I think
But there are a number of folks that
So go up to us. Go to the three things. And just do stop video.
you hearing me now?
We hear you.
Okay. Well, I apologize. I obviously did not work out all the technical details of getting the sound in there too. So we will do those next month. But Marilyn Taylor has a nice one, and Kathy Geary did one, and I apologize I didn't figure out that audio part of it. So I guess at this point, I will introduce Maren Gimpel, who is a field ecologist and outreach coordinator at the River and Field campus, overseen by Washington College's Center for Environment and Society, where she bands birds for both migratory and breeding studies. She's been a bander since 2002 and a birder for more than 25 years. Maren compiles the local Chesterville Christmas bird count. Is that happening this year, Maren?
Yes, on Sunday, the 27th.
We're muted, aren't we?
Not. All right, hold on. That's my
Can
issue.
you hear me? Can other people hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
That might matter later.
Okay. All right, I think, yeah, go ahead, Maren.
So if I do
So are
share
you,
screen.
is everybody hearing Maren?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. Maren, it's good to have you here finally. She was scheduled to do an in-person talk in May for us. So we're getting the next best thing. And if everybody can make sure you're on mute, and you may want to click speaker view to maximize the presentation screen. All right, take it away.
Can everybody see my pretty sparrow?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So as Chris said, my name is Maren Gimpel and I work for Washington College. And I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about mostly the bird banding and research that we do with Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory, but also some of our grassland research. So when we talk about the River and Field Campus, it's what many of you may have heard of as Chino Farms. We are just outside of Chestertown in Queen Anne's County. Can you see my mouse when I move it? Can I use it as a pointer? Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
Cool. Okay, so this is the Chester River along the top of the screen, and the property is not contiguous, so we have separate chunks that are all part of the same entity now. It's over 5,600 acres. 99% of the farm is in conservation easements. Most of it is farmland, although there are some woodlots and a man-made lake, some other habitat types. And the whole property was designated an important bird area back in maybe 2006, a long time ago now. But all of our bird studies are mostly sort of concentrated, as I mentioned, between our grasslands research and the bird banding station. And the grasslands are on this chunk of the property that is up against the Chester River. And then only after I put a big yellow circle around this did I realize that branch was spelled wrong. So I'll have to fix my slide. But the bird observatory is just, you know, as the crow flies, sort of 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from the grasslands project. So I'll start with a little bit about the grasslands. This is an aerial shot, so again, you can see the Chester River, and then all this nice green sort of block pattern is our grasslands. It was in row crop agriculture until the late 90s, so it would have looked like the rest of this surrounding area. You can see all the patchwork of fields. It wasn't super productive agricultural ground, and so the farm owner, Dr. Harry Sears, was interested in other potential things to do with the property. He got talking to Doug Gill, who's now Professor Emeritus at University of Maryland College Park, and they came up with this idea to recreate a native warm season grassland. It's a habitat that's hard to find these days in Maryland and on the shore. A lot of grassland birds are in decline. It seemed like it maybe wasn't going to be that hard, so they decided to go for it. Turns out keeping it a grassland has been a major work project. It's a lot of management. But the fields were sort of divided up into blocks. They were planted with a paired field, so there were 2 blocks with the same seed mix. It was originally conceived as also a vegetation, you know, like botanical study and not just for birds. And so there were tall grass mixes and short grass mixes, and it turns out they're all close enough together that it's all just sort of become one thing. So that part didn't work out as well. But you can see that it's in grid blocks still. It is mostly open. We have a few little shrub islands. And you can even see these various stripes and down here like wiggles. And those are various management techniques we've been trying, sort of spraying in patterns and disking, things to sort of keep the woody vegetation out. So this whole chunk is about 220 acres, and it's all native warm season grasses, so bunch grasses, not like cool season grasses are like your lawn, turf grasses. And so we've had a banding program out there for 21 years now. We've banded nearly 16,000 birds on that part of the farm. Our first sort of focal species was grasshopper sparrow, so that's why they're the most numerous species. But the area is also used by other grassland birds. Dick thistles have been there sort of sporadically, not so much more recently, but we had a good run in sort of the mid-2000s where we had breeding dick thistles for several summers in a row. And we don't have breeding bobolinks, but we have molt migrating bobolinks. So a lot of birds molt where they bred for the season, like field sparrows, breed in Maryland, molt here, and then migrate to the wintering grounds. Or there are things like orioles that will breed in Maryland, migrate first, and then molt on the wintering ground. Bobolinks do something weird in between where they leave the breeding ground and go a short distance and then molt and then keep going. So they don't breed on the site, but they show up in late July and early August. They show up looking like the one pictured. By the time they leave, they're all streaky and brown. And so as I said, grasshopper sparrows were sort of our first focal species. It was mostly just because it's what showed up in really big numbers. And so the crew at the time was like, well, let's study grasshopper sparrows. This is a map of male grasshopper sparrow territories. So we get as many of them color banded as we can. The research crew is following them around all summer through spotting scopes and binoculars and following them around with GPSs. And then when you throw it into GIS, you get a map like this so you can see what an individual male territory is like. And they vary in size, mostly having to do with the quality of the field in any given summer. So if the grass gets too tall and thick, like this area in the middle, that got taken over with switchgrass, and the grass got really sort of tall. Grasshopper sparrows didn't really like it, so they have fewer territories, and when they have are bigger. And then if you go further to the left here, these are more numerous and smaller. They just like that field better, so they squish in. And so we were looking at things like return rates, longevity records. We did a radio tracking study for a couple of years to see what fledgling grasshopper sparrows did in terms of habitat choices. And we've got a lot of papers out of the grasshopper sparrows. There are actually not that many grasshopper sparrows left on the plot. I think it's a reflection of the changing vegetation as opposed to an alarming trend. I mean, they're trending downward, but the fields have gotten a lot taller and thicker than they were originally, and so the grasshopper sparrows don't like it as much, but we still have loads of quail. So we collaborated starting back in 2009 with DNR to do a radio tracking project. So this thing coming off the back of the quail is the antenna, and these are radio transmitters that are sort of the size of a quarter, but they're sort of rounded, and they wear it like a necklace. So the reason these feathers are puffed out here is that the battery part of the unit is sort of nestled underneath those feathers. This is a female quail with the beige throat and eyeline. Chino, or River and Field Campus, has what we believe to be the biggest wild quail population in the state currently. So it's a good place to sort of team up with DNR, see what we could find out. So they put radio transmitters on, I don't remember how many, quite a few quail, maybe 50 or so. And they radio tracked them throughout early fall into the winter. And then it didn't go so well. So this is a figure, this is the male Bob White, of two kinds of surveys that we do for quail. So one is the summer calling male. So it's like point counts, you go out, you have a set time period, and you listen for how many calls you hear of the quail saying Bob White. And in the fall, you can do covey counts, where you go out at sunrise and you listen for other, I call it their booping. If you've ever heard quail at sunrise, it's sort of weird beat, not beats, it's like boops. They're like whoop. They're checking back in with the group in the morning in case they got split up. And so one is for summer, one is for fall. And so if you look, we didn't do summer counts in 2009, but they did the fall counts, and you can see where this bar was. And that's when we started this radio tracking project. And then you look at this precipice they all jumped off of in 2010. Some of you probably remember significant meteorological events of 2010. That was the winter of the snowpocalypses. And so the radio tracking project proved that, like, the quail population was basically decimated. They would follow the transmitters and they found dead, starving quail. Literally decimated, like basically 90% of the population was lost. With quail and with most songbirds, it's not really the cold of winter that's a problem, it's food availability. And so quail feed on the ground, they eat small seeds throughout the winter, and when everything was buried under 2 feet of snow, or a foot of snow for weeks at a time, they just starved. So we were really worried about what would happen, but you can see that they just have steadily rebounded in the years since. They're pretty prolific breeders. Quail can nest multiple times in the summer, and they can have broods of up to like 15 chicks. So if they succeed, it doesn't take that long. You can see that by 2015, so 5 years later, they were pretty much back to where they were before the horrible snows. And now things have sort of normalized. We'll have to get another year or two to see what this decline in the summer counts might mean. Hopefully it's just sort of variation and not a trend. So that's sort of our quail. It's mostly monitoring now. And then the grasshopper sparrows were decreasing on the site, and we'd sort of done a lot of work with them already. And so several years ago, we made a pivot to field sparrows. They're a little more flexible in their habitat requirements. They can do better with slightly scrubbier, woodier vegetation. But our framework was sort of the same. So we color banded as many adults as we could capture so that you can ID them from afar. So this is just a close-up of what the color bands look like, and we find as many nests as we can and monitor them to sort of see whether they successfully fledge chicks or not. And the first thing that we looked at with these birds had to do with parental age. So we did still the same thing as with the grasshopper sparrows, took territory points, saw where they were, saw what was going on. And then we spent 3 summers videotaping nests. And I should take a quick time out here to say that bird banding allows you generally to age birds to sort of like less than a year old or more than a year old in songbirds. And so there had been research done on first-time breeders, so those birds haven't even turned 1 yet, versus all the other adults in the population. But nobody had really done much research on looking at breeding success throughout a bird's lifetime. And because we've had a banding program in the grasslands for so long, we have a bunch of birds that we know exactly how old they are. We don't have to say this bird is 1, this bird is older than 1. We know which birds are 2, we know which birds are 6, we know which birds are 8. And so we thought, wouldn't it be great if those age classes showed something, like do birds become better parents with more experience as they move along? So we set up cameras and we videotaped a bunch of nests to look at provisioning rates. So these are all screen shots from the videos. And so starting in the top right here, these are chicks with their necks outstretched, waiting for the parent up here who's got a little cricket or grasshoppery thing to bring down. In the bottom right, this is a female just brooding on her nest, so she's pretty camouflaged right in there. In this bottom left corner, this bird has a whole mouthful of green caterpillars. This nest is below the frame. And then up here, this is a male bird that's removing a fecal sac. The nest is sort of behind him by his feet here, and he's taking a fecal sac away with him after having fed them. So for 3 summers, we videotaped nests, watched them back, and the results were supporting and not supporting some previous studies. So in our study, we did corroborate with other people that the older the chicks get, or the more chicks that are in a nest, parents will feed at higher rates. So we didn't try and quantify like how much food they had in their bills. It was like the number of feeding trips they made per hour. So they fed older chicks and larger broods more frequently, which is what you would expect. Bigger chicks need more food, and that's been shown in other studies. But in our study, the males consistently fed at higher rates than the females, which contradicted some of the field sparrow studies from the 70s and 80s. So I'm not sure what that is. It made sense to us intuitively, like females have other requirements, like they're brooding, so maybe there's a trade-off there where they spend so much time at the nest that they have less time to like go on the food runs. We didn't find any difference with nest success, but we did find that the earlier in the season nests failed more often than those later in the season. And that's probably a combination of weather and something to do with depredation. Like the grasses are shorter, the nests are easier to find, so maybe they're easier to find for predators as well. We're not really sure. So our current research is to see, and I should say there was no real difference with age of adults in this data. So now we're looking at this same idea with age of the parents, but we're going to look at the actual nest itself. So we've measured now a bunch of characteristics of the nest, how concealed it is, how high off the ground, that kind of thing. And we're still collecting that data, but we're going to see if there's anything about the nest placement and construction. The females build the nests all on their own. So we're going to see whether older females, do anything different with nests than new or younger, less experienced breeders. So switching gears to the Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory, I'm going to spend more time talking about this, which is sort of fitting because it's where I spend more time of the year. I spend about 3 months in the summer with the field sparrows, but I spend about 7 months of the year at FBBO. I know some of you have been out to the banding station before, so you might recognize a few things, but for some of you, this will be new. So on the left, this is the shed that we work out of currently. It has electricity and space heaters and is mostly waterproof, but a driving rain gets in through the cracks. And we have very little space inside, and we're actually in the middle of a fundraising campaign to build a new, bigger building that's going to have meeting space attached, and it's going to be super fancy. But for now, this is what we're working out of. It's like 12 by 16 feet or something. And on the right is a map of where we have nets. And it's a little hard to tell from this map, but this is the man-made lake that's called Foreman's Branch. It's how we named the station. And I included the map just so you could get a little sense of the different habitat types. So we have nets that are in edges of agricultural fields. We have second growth. This is all sort of scrubby woods. This is like this is a switchgrass field. This is a fallow field. So these nets sort of straddle those two grassy areas. Then these are in mature woods. And then we have a few nets that go over a bridge over this body of water. And those few nets bring us a lot of special fun birds. So that's kind of cool. So we do spring and fall migration banding. Our seasons are pretty long, so March through May for spring, and it may have felt like winter today, but our fall migration season doesn't end until the end of this month. So I was outside shivering today in the November wind, catching migrants still. This is a group that's probably pretty familiar with banding and its uses, but I left this slide in just to sort of reiterate how many valuable data things and uses there are of banding data. So like I spoke about with the field sparrows, you can use color banding to identify individual birds. I always think of banding primarily as sort of a mark and recapture idea, but even if you never recapture that bird, and even if no one else ever sees that bird again, having it in hand the one time still gets you, you know, body condition. Is the bird fat, body size? It's a way to count how many birds of what species were in your area on that specific day, things like that. So, and if you've ever come out and seen it in the hand, it's a great education tool, a great way to get people excited about birds and why they matter. So who's doing all this work? We have 2 permanent staff, myself and Jim Gruber up here on the right. He's been around the MOS scene since he was a teenager, so some of you might know Jim. Then we hire seasonal banders. These are people that are usually in their mid to late 20s and are doing sort of itinerant bird work. We hire only experienced people because we are so busy. We're a very high volume station. So we hire one helper in the spring and 2 for the fall season. And then we have Washington College interns who generally are very new and often don't know anything about birds. And we have a few area teenagers that we work with. So some of you might recognize in the bottom left here, Jonathan Irons. The Irons brothers have been coming out for like 5 years already. But dealing with youth is a really important part of our mission for us. I like to think of it as training the next generation of conservationists, researchers, people that are going to care about the environment. And especially from a Washington College perspective, these students are learning things that I didn't learn until I was 5 years out of college. I mean, I started working as an itinerant bird person in my mid-20s. If these kids can graduate from college and have already done an internship and have hands-on experience and they want to stick with it, they definitely have a leg up on people when they go into the real world and want to find jobs. So the station was founded in 1998, and we hit a major milestone late last month. We banded our 300,000th bird since the station was founded. And it was this actual white-throat, this is the bird, and shameless plug, to celebrate and raise a little money, we're currently hawking apparel with this lovely white-throated sparrow on it. So if anybody needs another bird shirt for their collection with a little extra proceeds for a good cause, you can find our merch campaign online right now. But in addition to having banded over 300,000 birds, we've banded 177 species, which is really kind of incredible for a passerine banding station. We actually added 2 new species just this fall. We banded our first ever red-headed woodpecker. They're pretty uncommon on the site. I've only seen them on the property a handful of times. And this one, we hadn't heard it around or seen it or anything. And we just walked around a corner and there it was in a net. So that was really exciting. And luckily it was an adult, so it made like the best photo op ever. And the other new species we added this fall was evening grosbeaks. And I know, not everyone, but I know they're frequently being seen and heard around right now. But we had only heard a few, you know, like way up in the air flyovers. And they came sort of lower for one day, you know, so you could see them in a tree. And the next day we caught 3 on one day, and then no more. So if that's the only evening grosbeaks I get to band in life, I'm happy. It was awesome. And we had both males and females, so it made like cool comparison. So that was really cool. And also in a non-COVID world, we do host a lot of visitors. We've had over 5,000, and I know the Anne Arundel Bird Club's come out, at least half a dozen times. So hopefully on the other side of COVID, those of you that haven't come out can come and see all this stuff in person. I'm going to touch on a few highlights or cool things. One of the questions we get asked most frequently is sort of, okay, so you've been doing this, 20 plus years, what have you found? And in fact, Chris sort of wanted that to be the title of the talk, and I said, whoa. It takes a long time to sort of tell the difference between trends and just sort of changing dynamics. And we actually are only just starting to do some of this data analysis now. So I don't have hard data, but I did put together just 2 brief examples to show you. And I should say that both of these charts are just raw numbers of the birds we've captured, which is not the scientific way to do it. When we redo these, we're going to do it birds per net hour. So it's a way of taking effort into account. Because you could say, oh, I saw, 300 species of birds. And someone say, well, when? This year, this month, in your lifetime? So with banding, you take into account how many nets you had open for how long as a way to quantify the effort into your banding. And so we haven't done that with the 2 graphs I'm going to show you. So these are just northern mockingbird captures by year. And my sense is that they're down, and it looks like they're down. I'm going to have to redo this chart when we've put effort into it. But we're going to make charts like this for a lot of different species in the coming year so that we can look at the trends over 20 years to try and get a better sense of, are these things just up and down, or are they really heading in an unfortunate direction? So this is the one for mockingbirds, and then I made a second one for chipping sparrows. So it's another species that also feels like it's down. You look at the chart, it looks like it's down. But we had other blips that they sort of bounced up again from. So I'm really looking forward to what we find in this data of sort of putting effort into it and what are the trend lines for some of these species. And I should say, the other reason it takes so long, so many years of data to sort of get a sense for the trends is that there are so many variables involved in bird banding. You could have a really good, successful year on the breeding grounds, and so there's tons of birds that are here to migrate south. You could have a year like right now, siskins. We've banded over 600 siskins this fall. The average number of siskins we band in a fall is 30. Does this mean that the siskin population is like exploding? Well, no. As birders, we know the population has just moved around. So it really takes a long time. If you didn't know that, you couldn't just look at 3 years of siskin numbers and have a good sense for what the population is doing. So now that we're 20 plus years, hopefully it's long enough to look at it and get a real sense of how things are going. We have a whole bunch of charts like this on our website for most of the species we band. This is just capture rates over the year with all the years pooled together. So if you were new to birding and you thought, oh, I've always loved ovenbirds, when can I see an ovenbird? You can use charts like this to see that in fall, middle of September is really the best time to look for ovenbirds in Queen Anne's County anyway. We do capture a wide variety of species. So the top left is a semi-palmated plover that we banded in May. I mentioned the nets that we have over the water. So we do band quite a few shorebirds, which is pretty unusual for a passerine station. The top middle is a whippoorwill. We've banded about half a dozen whippoorwills over the years. Earlier, before we started the talk, you guys were talking about barn owls. We've caught one barn owl on the very first net run in the morning. It was probably on its way home for the sleeping time and stumbled into our nets. We've banded a few pileated woodpeckers, They're regular, residents of the site, but there aren't very many, and they're really big, so they don't get caught easily. So pileated woodpeckers is super cool. The bottom middle is a young turkey. An adult turkey just destroys a mist net. They just run through it and rip it into a million pieces. Young turkeys sort of get caught, and we can't ban them because they're managed by the state as a non-migratory game bird, but we took pictures and oohed and awed over the turkey. And then the bottom right, people always ask us, like, what's the weirdest thing you've ever caught? The bottom right is a blue Quaker parrot. We kept it, put it in a cage that we had around, put its photo all over the internet, found its owners. It had escaped from a house that was only about 5 miles away from the banding station. He was reunited with his family. We learned his name was Gene. And so I have to say, Gene the parrot is really one of the most interesting things we've ever captured. On my slide about things you can do with bird banding data, you can use bird banding data to see how old birds can live. The average lifespan for a small songbird is probably 3 to 5 years, just the way the average lifespan for a person might be 75 or 80, whatever it is nowadays. But there are these outliers. There are people that live to be 102. So same with the birds. So this list is all birds banded at FBBO that were or are the oldest known of their species in North America. So the 2 with asterisks have since been surpassed by other banded birds, but all the rest of these, we hold the record. And it's kind of amazing how old these birds can live. I mean, who would have thought a goldfinch could live to be nearly 11 years old? It's pretty amazing. One of the coolest things on our website, if you're ever bored, is this map on the website. It's interactive, and you can zoom in and out and click on any dot and see what the species is and learn a little bit more about it. But we have this whole map of where birds have been found that we banded, and also birds that we captured if they were banded somewhere else, where did they come from? So a few of these that are interesting, I'll tell you about. But I have to give the pitch always. If you ever find a dead bird, you have to check its leg and see if it's banded. Almost all the dots on that map are from regular folks. They're not from banders. They're not from other researchers. They're just from people that find a dead bird. You don't even have to know what kind of bird it is. You can just go to the USGS website, reportband.gov, type in the band number. They want to know your location and the date that you found it. And they'll send you back a certificate, like in the upper right there. This was for a foreign retrapped saw-whet owl that we caught that had been already banded by the infamous Dave Brinker. But they'll tell you where the bird came from, and they'll tell the bander where the bird showed up. So a few of these that are kind of cool. In the upper right-hand corner there, we banded a northern water thrush at FBBO that was recaptured by a banding station in Newfoundland. So that's crazy. We've had multiple catbirds that we banded that have been, I don't think any of them were by banders, but have been found either dead. One was photographed. A photographer got good enough photos that we could read the band number. In Florida, catbirds seem to really like Florida and the Keys. And then, oh, where did my other picture go? This other one that's outside of Chicago is a cowbird. Oh, there he is. And it's almost the farthest west recovery we've had. It was really from northern Indiana, almost at the Michigan border. But that one's really interesting because you can see it's so far away from the other dots. Most of these birds are all concentrated along the Atlantic or Eastern Flyway, which is basically the I-95 corridor. This is kind of an outlier to be that far west. So it's kind of interesting. The furthest west one we have is actually this dot down here in Alabama for a hummingbird. So we band hummingbirds at FBBO. We band all our birds on the left leg. And And there's a whole network of hummingbird banders, especially along the Gulf Coast. And this group moves around between various homeowners who all have feeders and keep an eye out. So they had a homeowner contact the banding group and say, I have a banded hummingbird at my house and it's banded on the left leg. And so that instantly piqued all their interest. And so it was a bird we had banded in May, and it was recaptured in Alabama that same September. And so that's the actual bird that they took a picture of at its feeder and their data, foreign recap. So that was an exciting day for both of us. And it's over 900 miles away from Maryland. We've banded over 3,600 hummingbirds since 1998, and we've probably gotten word back on about 3 or 4, not many. And hummingbirds, if you're not familiar, have a pretty cool migration. In the fall, they go around the Gulf of Mexico, and in the spring, they're so eager to get back north that they sort of all funnel up the Yucatan and then fly across the Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of a cool, dangerous strategy, saves time. Another really cool recovery, foreign recap, was we caught a black and white warbler in May of 2013 that was already banded. And when you enter it into the banding lab website, if it seems suspicious to them in any way, they sort of flag it the way eBird does now, and they're sort of like, are you sure? And and we were like, yes, we're sure. Why, why is it so skeptical? Well, it turned out it had been banded by Manomet up in southeastern Massachusetts. It's about 350 miles away. So far that didn't seem too weird. We're like, why were they so freaked out? Well, it was banded in 2003. We caught it in 2013. So it was flagged because it was so old. And at the time we caught it, it would have been 10 years and 11 months old, black and white warbler. And then if you want to blow your mind even more, this is a range map of black and white warblers. Okay, so Massachusetts, they banded it in May. It probably bred a little either at that site or a little farther north. They winter, throughout Central America and the Caribbean. Then it would have had to go back again. By the time we captured it, it had made 22 trips between the summering and wintering grounds. Sometimes I think we just sort of lose track of what kinds of amazing things these birds are doing. Away from the banding station, we have a bluebird box trail or nest box trail of about 100 nest boxes on the farm. We get mostly tree swallows, but we band bluebirds, chickadees, titmice, whatever uses them, except house sparrows. They get evicted. We've banded over 4,000 nestlings out of the boxes over the years, and we turn this data into Cornell's Nest Watch program now. And then we band saw-whet owls. In fact, if I was not talking to you right now, I would instead be very cold, sitting in our little shed, trying to catch owls tonight. If you're not familiar, saw-whet owls are the smallest owl in the East. They were relatively unknown, sort of scientifically speaking, until about 30 years ago. They weren't really known to be migratory. Dave Brinker of Maryland DNR sort of co-founded this project OwlNet with Scott Weidenthal, and they put together a protocol, got a whole bunch of other crazy banders to sit out on cold, dark, windy nights. And basically, we open nets after dark. We have a really loud speaker that plays their toot, toot, toot call. And even though they're not on territory, they're migrating, they still are drawn into it, and they come to the speaker and get captured in the nets. So we've banded almost 900. Actually, this doesn't include this year. So now we're over 900 birds for the project's life at our station. And because people are targeting them by playing the call, your chances of getting a bird that was banded somewhere else is way higher than just daytime banding. So we've banded, or we've captured 62 birds that were banded by somebody else, which is pretty much the coolest thing that happens when you're a bander. So saw abandon's pretty awesome. This year was supposed to be pretty good. Everybody was really excited. Dave Brinker also helps with the banding station with Sawets in Maine, and they had a really amazing season. And somehow it's failed to materialize in sort of the mid-Atlantic. I don't know whether those like 3 warm weeks of south winds messed everything up, or whether the owls just stayed sort of more northern, and who knows. Their numbers sort of fluctuate a lot the way the other winter finches do, where some years there are very few. I think our low year, we got 14, and that's going out for 4 to 5 hours a night for at least sort of 3 weeks. And our biggest year ever was almost 300. So it really depends on what the vole population has done. It's like the snowy owls, sort of how much food was there, how many young did they produce, that kind of thing. So this year we're at 42 birds, I think. And we'll go out a couple more nights, see if we can get a few more for this season. We have a bunch of osprey platforms around the property. This is Jim Gruber up in a cherry picker. We used to have a super non-OSHA approved system that involved an extension ladder in the back of a truck. Yeah, we've upgraded. We rent this official device now, and it's much safer and more fun. We've banded over 160 osprey. We band the chicks before they're old enough to fly. These birds look pretty big, but those are still flightless young birds. And amazingly, with only banding 161, we've had 4 recoveries, all from South America. The bummer part is that all 4 of them were dead, but it's still a long ways away, and it's pretty awesome dots for my map. And then I'll talk just really quickly about some of the collaborators we're working with. This is mostly collecting data for other people. So one of the first ones we were involved in was collecting ticks from birds. So you can see this yellow throat around its eye, those little dark blobs, these are ticks. We started out collecting them for the University of Richmond. Originally, they were interested in testing them all for Lyme disease. Now we collect ticks and we send them to Old Dominion, and they're more interested in sort of surveying the ticks and identifying them to species. They're studying how ticks of certain species may be expanding their range by hitching a ride on migratory birds. So when we have time and we see ticks on birds, we just get our little tweezers, pick them off, put them in a little Ziploc bag. At the end of the season, I mail them, down to them, and they sort through them all and ID them. And right now they're monitoring this, I don't know how to say its scientific name, but it's called like the Asian longhorn tick, I think, and it's like the new big villainous tick everybody's worried about. I guess it's bad for livestock. But if you're a tick researcher, and I should say this is true of many of the things I'm going to describe next, if you just wanted a few ticks from a bird, there's no way you could go set up a banding station, hire banders, run the whole thing just to get your ticks. So because we already have a banding station and we're already there, we already have a crew, we're already trained, it's pretty easy for us to add on a few more of these data collections for other people. So assuming we have time to do it, we're not burdened with other things. We like to try and say yes to this kind of stuff. Now, before this year, probably nobody would have known what this was. It's not COVID, but this is a picture of the H1N1 flu. And pretty in its own way. But about 10 years ago, people got really worried about H1N1 bird flu, and Maryland DNR again asked us to collaborate, and we took fecal samples of a wide variety of bird species, sent them back to them. They ran them all in the lab. None of the birds we ever sampled ever tested positive for bird flu, so yay. One of the bigger projects we got involved with was a multi-year project on whether light pollution is affecting bird movements. This was with a PhD student at the University of Delaware. We've probably all seen the pictures of the birds like swarming in the 9/11 tribute lights, and those of us on the call now probably know about the dangers of lights and buildings to birds. But there's been very little sort of quantifiable study and data on this until pretty recently. So this grad student found several field sites in Maryland and Delaware. He has this trailer that's a tracking radar. This bottom left is the inside of it. I think it looks like Hunt for Red October in there. But he trailered this big thing out to the farm, and we went about our normal banding, except that they installed these giant lights. So this picture is taken in complete darkness, and these lights are so bright, you could have read a book under them. And so our site was an experimental site, because if the lights were off, we're in a very dark place. But when the lights are on, it's not. So he could manipulate our site, and the lights were turned on and off, you know, in a pattern, so that he could compare the banding data for when the lights were on versus off. And with the radar, he could sit there at night and follow individual birds. So he would sort of see a bird come in, he'd get it on the radar and sort of follow it. Did it go toward the light? Did it circle in the light? Did it veer away? That kind of thing. And he had other sites. He had one in Elk Neck State Forest that was dark and stayed dark. And he had other sites where people were banding near city lights closer to Newark. So we were the experimental site. He's still analyzing data and writing stuff up, so I don't know exactly what he's found, but hopefully the data shows that lights are bad, because we need to convince people to turn off their lights. Another fecal, there's a lot of poop in birds. So we collected fecal samples from cowbirds for a researcher at Patuxent several years ago. She was interested in whether their gut biome was more diverse than other birds, because cowbirds, being nest parasites, they were exposed to different species, and did that change their gut flora? And more recently, we've been taking fecal samples from blackpoll warblers for a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. He's more interested just in sort of, I want to say mapping the genome, but it's not the genome. It's just sort of establishing what the gut flora is like. So if you thought gut health was only for people, no, people care about birds' gut biomes. From a banding standpoint, it's actually a really easy data point to do for them. You know, after you finish banding and measuring and doing all the stuff with the birds, you just put them in a little paper lunch bag, fold the top over, put a clothespin on, wait 5 minutes, you know, go back in, look in, usually they've pooped. You get a little Q-tip, sterile swab, you know, sort of wipe it up, put it in their vials with whatever medium they're using, done. So it's again, it's like the ticks, it's a very easy thing for us to do for collaborators. And then our most recent project involves MODIS, and again, building collisions, not lights, but buildings. So MODIS, if you haven't heard of it, is a international network of receiver stations that pick up transmissions from small tags on wildlife. So it's mostly birds, but it also is bats. The really big dragonflies are big enough to have receivers on them, or transmitters. So the map is showing you all the places where there are receiving stations, and they just look like the bottom left here, giant antenna. And they're hooked up to a little tiny computer thing and a car battery. And so they just sit there. And anytime a tagged bird flies by, it pings those antennae, and the data gets logged. And so it's totally passive, as opposed to like the DNR study I mentioned with quail, where a person had to go out and hold an antenna and walk around and look for the birds. So we are part of MODIS, working with Luc de Groot, who works at Powder Mill Research Center, which is outside of Pittsburgh. And his study is trying to look at what happens to birds that have been rehabilitated after they hit buildings. So by now, probably everyone listening here knows that birds hit buildings frequently. Now through things like Lights Out Baltimore, there are teams of volunteers that walk around cities in the morning to collect the injured birds and to sort of catalog the dead birds. Injured birds are transported to rehabbers who, you know, if possible, nurse them back to health and then release them. But nobody really knows what happens to those birds that have been deemed releasable. They could die the next day. they could have brain damage and not behave properly. They could migrate the wrong way, like nobody knows. And if you think about what we're learning about human head injuries, you know, it's cumulative, it takes time, you know, repeated is worse, so heaven help the bird that hits windows multiple times. But so anyway, this project is taking advantage of that network of rehabbers. And again, I'm sort of the control site, so I deploy tags on birds that, to our knowledge, have not hit buildings. So we have a list of focal species. There's a woman named Kathy who works at Phoenix Wildlife Rescue. She will text me and say, somebody brought us in a woodcock. It's gonna be good to go. We're gonna release it tomorrow. She will put a tag on her woodcock. I will put a tag on the next woodcock we catch, and they both get released. And then hopefully they ping these towers, and Luke can see whether their movements seem normal or expected. He's got a network of people doing this, so he's got teams outside of Pittsburgh, outside of Cleveland, Baltimore, so it's sort of a regional thing. And the sample size is small, so it's going to take him a while to follow enough birds to sort of see what happens. And then hot off the presses, this project is so new it hasn't even started yet, but it's kind of cool, so I threw it in anyway. If anybody looks at Audubon, there was a story about robins in the most recent magazine, and so we are teaming up with that researcher. So Emily Williams is a PhD student at Georgetown, and she is trying to figure out what is going on with robins across the continent, and she is got collaborators from all across the continent who are going to color band robins, take blood samples, feather samples for genetic testing, and deploy a different kind of transmitter. So all the other ones are land-based. These are going to be satellite transmitters, and the satellite that tracks them, this is so cool, it's part of the Icarus network, and the satellite is on the International Space Station. I feel like that was all she had to tell me, and I was like, wait, I'm going to tag a bird that's tracked by the space station? I'm like, I'm in. This is like amazing. So we were supposed to start this fall, but we had to get new permissions added to our federal banding permits, and the tags are manufactured in Germany, and there was a delay getting them to the States. So I probably won't start deploying tags until March. But she is hoping to sort of investigate further what is going on with robins. And so if you think about it, we have robins in Maryland all year. Are they the same robins? Are the summer robins different from the winter robins? Where do all the robins, you know, on this range map, where do all these northern robins go? Do they jump over all the purple year-round robins and go to the wintering grounds? Do they intermix? Are there groups that all move together, sort of sub-populations? No one's really looked into it, no one really knows. So that's what she's hoping to get at. So that sounds like a really cool project to be a part of. And with that, I'll give you one quick pitch. We have a Facebook and Instagram account. It's like 95% birds. I do throw in occasional flowers or turtles or bats or something else of interest. But if you're ever in the market for nothing having to do with bad news or politics or anything but pretty, well, I shouldn't say they're not always pretty, but wildlife sort of things happening seasonally in Maryland, check us out on social media. New content every day, lots of things to see. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Let me make my screen.
All right, thanks, Maren. That was great. And I posted the link to your bonfire campaign for the 300,000th T-shirt.
Thank you.
And there are several other shirts in bonfire that they do.
Yeah, the white throat one is just a new one. But yeah, maybe you like owls better and you need an owl shirt.
Well, I like the yellow throat.
Well, we make a little bit of profit off that. And I should say, even though we're part of Washington College, we don't get institutional support. Like, we don't get tuition dollars from them. So we run off grants and small donations. And private benefactors and such. So
Yeah.
every dollar we get helps.
So yeah, and it looks like there's 1 day left on this current campaign for the white-throated sparrow shirt.
Well, that's just to hype it. If you want
I
one,
know. I do my own bonfire campaign, so I know how that works. I'm just trying to encourage people, hey, if you want to buy one, do it tonight.
Yeah. But if you remember on Sunday, you can buy one on Sunday.
So if anybody has a question, you can put it in the chat or just feel free to speak out and ask.
Okay, is it all right if I ask? First of all, I'd like to make some comments. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you for everything you've done for our club, all the great opportunities we've had to come to your place. I've been there several times, and every time I go there, I think I'm going to a class, because you really do teach us a lot, and you say a lot of really awesome things that makes me understand so much more. But today, specifically, all the contributions you've made to specific projects where you've picked up with the different things that are going on in the colleges and so on, I mean, that's like a real contribution to the whole thing we're all trying to understand, right? So thank you again for that. I have to say another thing. One of the things I really understand, I think it was one of my happiest moments, was watching Sue, who's with me here, releasing swains and thrushes and warblers and stuff. I mean, just that's a special moment, right? You're amazing. I really want to thank you, and it's so much to think about, and we appreciate it, and I hope personally I get to come again.
Yeah, hope so. Hope it's sooner than later.
I'd just like to echo that thought, that to thank you very much, because I was one of the people also who had been lucky enough to visit you and get the experience and tour there and see what you guys do hands-on. And to hear you again tonight, it's been inspiration again, just to hear the excitement, the energy that you have behind your passion you have for the work that you're doing. Thank you, and keep doing it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I'll add to that too, that I know all the people from Anne Arundel Bird Club who have been out there just come back jaws dropping with the experience, which is just phenomenal. And personally, I'm real excited about that Icarus project, because I think it was Pete Mara contacted me, and I think I connected him with you, or somehow it was in that way, but I knew about this project going on. So I can't wait to see what the International Space Station can do for bird conservation too.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
So, Maren, can you talk about your funding just a little more? I mean, so did you say that Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory is all self-funded? You don't get anything from Washington College? But the Field Research Center does, I'm assuming.
Not. So most of our money comes from large private sort of like foundation grants.
Yeah.
And our student workers, like the internships that we have, are funded through college accounts. But like my salary, like we fundraise for my salary, we fundraise to buy mist nets. Mist nets are really expensive, actually. That's one of the, well, and me, I'm expensive too, but
You should be.
The government provides us the bands, so those are free to banders. So we don't have a lot of crazy costs. I mean, we provide spotting scopes and binoculars to the students that work for us, but that's a one-time, not a one-time, but it's one expense, and hopefully they last a long time and no one breaks the scopes. Yeah, so I'm not beating the bushes all the time, because we do have a few sort of private foundations that give a pretty big chunk every year. But we don't get any institutional like tuition dollars or anything.
I have another question about the research, the Field Research Center. So, as the habitat has changed over the last 20 years since it's been converted into grasses, are there other? Do the bird studies collaborate or coordinate with any other researchers who are studying, insect populations or populations, reptiles, and
I would say that we don't collaborate, but we facilitate. So this is sort of a newer area for us, and the dealing with the infrastructure and the logistics of how to host people, we're still sort of working out. And of course, COVID has totally screwed that up. But we have had entomologists come out to do surveys, because just as grasslands are a rare habitat that's disappearing for birds that specialize in that habitat, the same is true of the other wildlife, and I'm going to call insects wildlife. My dad's an entomologist, so I'm just going to do it. It's the true of them too, right? So like the grassland species of insects are going to be different than maybe what's in your backyard.
Yeah.
So we've had some entomologists come out. Sam Drogi came out and did some bee surveys on a different part of the farm. We haven't had any herp people, but we've had some we get a lot of interest from grad students that just sort of need a place to do things. So we have someone that's studying the seed bank, taking soil cores and then taking them in and seeing what germinates. And I have two new projects that people have asked about doing this coming year. And one is a grad student from American University who wants to study vultures and how black vultures and turkey vultures fight or don't fight over food. And so they're gonna find pieces that they're going to put out around the farm and then like sit and watch and see how they interact. So I feel I'm not a PhD. I'm not like a trained, graduate student, but I have access to this property. And so as much as we can facilitate both with collaborators at the banding station or outside people that have use of the property in some other way, I feel like we need to do that as much as we can. We do have a house on the property, so in non-COVID times, these visiting researchers can come and stay in the house while they do things. So yeah, that's an area that we're always looking to sort of explore, keep an ear to the ground, see who might need a space to do research.
Thanks.
Maren, I've got a question about Bob White. If I understood you correctly, you have good populations there, but they do not breed on the property.
No, they do breed.
Oh, they do breed on the property.
Yeah.
Well, then that already answered my question.
How did they all get there?
I thought you were saying that they all came in to the property.
No. And actually, the quail research and the establishment of those grasslands and managing them sort of has spun off a whole side program here called the Natural Lands Project. Dan Small, who some of you may know, runs that. And he now has DNR grants and NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grants, to go out to private landowners and some public lands actually to try and replicate what we've done and sort of explain to other people that you can put in this habitat. And we're sort of pitching it to people as like, hey, do you miss your quail? Put in some habitat and your quail might come back. It's a little trickier than that because quail are not migratory, and so they're only going to disperse, as much as they need to avoid inbreeding in their area. And so, you hear quail sort of around greater Chino, but if you're sort of like 30 miles away from us, it's pretty hard to get quail to show up. So they're trying to get networks of farms and sort of make bridges so the quails can sort of gradually expand out. And one more pitch. Dan's also done a really big project at Conquest Beach Preserve in Queen Anne's County. I think he mentioned it on the birding listserv, but if anybody is looking for a place to go birding in Queen Anne's, he's put in a huge chunk of habitat there, and there's going to be wetlands and cool new Queen Anne's birding destination.
Okay, thanks.
How can we find those? Where can we find those destinations you just mentioned? Is there?
It's outside Centerville. It's called Conquest Beach Preserve. It's a Queen Anne's County-owned park.
Okay. Okay,
So
great.
I think when
Thank you.
MOS had the convention at Washington College, there was like a couple days before, I think it was Rich Mason had the scissortail flycatcher sighting.
Oh, yeah.
That was at Conquest Beach.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and it promptly
saw
disappeared
Alan writing
before
it
we all
down.
got there.
I had a question, Maren. I was wondering, there's a lot of farming that still goes on the property. How does it work with the research you're trying to do in conjunction with active farming? Are there interferences, or have you been able to work it all out over time?
Time out 1 second. Hi. I work at CES. They were supposed to tell you that I would be here tonight.
Security issue.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Do you need to see my ID?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It just, our list says nobody's supposed to be in here after 6:30.
Jamie Freeze put it on the calendar that I guess you guys could see that I would be in here.
Yeah.
I'll be out in about a half an hour.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Officers don't actually see that.
Oh, figures.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, literally security. And I was worried about that because I'm in the office and I had the office manager like tell public safety that I would be here because with COVID, like everything is like more tight and security than before. But yeah, she still was like, what are you doing here? Okay, so the question was, how does all the farming work with all our other research projects and such? Most of it is pretty smooth. The places where we're doing research are generally like adjacent to farm areas, but we're not in crop fields. We do, if we need to be super close to crop fields, we check in with the farm staff to make sure that, you know, like they didn't just spray or that a crop duster is coming over or anything like that. The other thing we coordinate is there is active hunting on the property. And so I'm actually the person that schedules all the uses of the property. So I have to know where everyone's going to be so that we don't have any hunting accidents. But yeah, so far it's worked fine. We don't really need to be in the farmer's way. I hope they don't think we're in the way.
Thank you.
Sure.
I had a question about, you had mentioned about grasshopper sparrows, the numbers going down, and you thought it was more related just to the habitat change. Do you do any kind of burns, prescribed fire there to keep habitat in a certain stage in certain parcels?
Yeah, and I see that Hank asked in the chat about, did the Eastern Shore historically have grasslands? There's some debate about how widespread grasslands would have been on the Eastern Shore historically. There would have been lightning strikes and beaver meadows and things like that. Would there ever have been naturally occurring 200 acres of grassland? I don't really know. So we've created sort of a weird island of habitat, but it does take lots of effort to keep out sumac and sweet gums. I hate sweet gums, black locust. So we have prescribed fire. We use that extensively. We burn in a mosaic pattern so that all parts of the fields get burned about every other year. And we do a little bit with herbicides. And we've still been trying to figure out the best way to use fire. Originally, we did all of our burns in early spring, like April and March and April. And it took us a while to realize that that just burned up all of the growth and made carbon that then fertilized all of the grass, which then grew up more robust than ever. So now we're trying to do half spring burns and half like now. They've started burning now because by then all the nutrients, you know, run off or get soaked up or whatever before things start growing again. So yeah, we use a lot of fire. And Dan would like to do more of it on the shore. It's a great way, if you have the skill set and the team, it's cheaper than a lot of other things and it's pretty quick and there's no, you know, biomass to move anywhere. And it's not a amateur hour. I mean, we have to file official burn plans with the state. We have to check in with the health department to talk about the wind direction and know, you know, we have chicken houses around us. The last thing you'd want is to smoke out a chicken house. You like smoked chicken, but not smoked. Yeah, so actually managing the grasslands has taken a lot of work. I should say though, that when those grasslands were planted in the late 90s, they were one of the first projects that NRCS sort of organized on that scale of CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, and they recommended seeding rates, like the number of seeds pounds per acre, that are just way higher than they recommend for anybody now. Like we were kind of the guinea pigs. And so now everybody knows, like, put in way less seed so you have more sparse. With bunch grasses, the point is to have bare ground between and allow room for forbs and stuff. So we've learned a lot about management over the years, for sure.
And I was also curious, as now you showed those two maps, one of grasshopper sparrows, one of field sparrows. Were those the same plots?
Mm-hmm.
So did you notice any kind of increase in field sparrows where grasshopper sparrows were decreasing?
So those were the same plots, but they were not the same years.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have the data from the same year to overlay. But I would say that they should be kind of different. I mean, if we burned a field in spring and the fresh growth is coming up and there's tons of charred stubble and bare ground and little tiny grass clumps, grasshopper sparrows are in heaven. They nest on the ground. They sort of find a little shallow divot. They line the bottom and build a little dome on top. Field sparrows, I have seen nests that are on the ground, but they still build a nest. So like the bottom of the nest might be on the ground, but they build a cup nest. And so in that same habitat I described, there basically isn't anywhere for a field sparrow to put a nest. So they would much rather be in taller, woodier, scrubbier things. As an aside, I do think that field sparrows, they sort of build much dumber nests than grasshopper sparrows. One of the tricks I do to impress my students sort of on the first day when everybody's learning how to find nests, it's like you can just sort of be standing, watching for birds. And if you see a field sparrow flying, like with purpose, and it goes into a grass clump that's, 200 feet away, I can be like, hang on. And I'll walk over there and I'll be like, found a nest. And they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, still. But I mean, a grasshopper sparrow, you can watch that grasshopper sparrow. You can memorize where it went down. And you think, okay, it's to the right of the black-eyed Susan, but it's before the little blue stem. And you can walk in there and you can still take 20 minutes to find it. I mean, they are so hidden. Grassland birds are sneaky.
I've heard some people call them feathered rats because sometimes they'll fly in and then run.
Yeah.
So their nest might be 10, 15 yards from where they actually set down.
Yeah, I'm glad that I had to find nests for grasshopper sparrows first, and then we switched to field sparrows, because if it had been the other way around, I would have probably gone home in tears every day. Now I just feel like a genius. I'm like, oh, I found 5 today.
I have a question for you. I've been to a lot of different banding stations, and I have to say the most aerobic banding station is yours. You leave the hut, and it's run to the nets. You do not let anything sit in the net too long.
Yeah.
It was great for the cardiovascular, birding. This is off the question. My wife was a school teacher, and she taught at Rockledge Elementary in Bowie.
Is your wife Barbara?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I think it was 4th grade.
Yeah. She said, don't say anything. Don't say anything.
No, that's great.
So she had, for science or homeroom or I don't know.
It was all day. It was 4th grade.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
It might have been
another person she's touched.
Yeah.
And a birder, no less.
I have hardly ever heard boo about any of my, well, this was not to age your wife, but I was in 4th grade a long time ago.
my wife has aged, yes.
Wow.
She looks just the same though,
I can't be anonymous with a name like Maren Gimpel. So your 4th grade teacher remembers you like 40 years later.
Yeah.
So fun. Yeah, well, hi, Mrs. Hannon.
Yeah, she's hiding at the moment. She's upstairs, She's the consummate NBS, which is a non-birding spouse. So she tolerates it, but she has a great life list of all sorts of tropical birds and stuff. But, she wants big showy ones now. Heck with these little sparrows. Bob Whites are okay, though.
The Bob White are cool.
So that's good. I will tell her. It just happened to come up. She said, oh, yeah, I got my start at Rockledge Elementary years ago. No, that's what she'll say.
That's amazing.
I'll get in trouble for that, though.
No, you won't. No, you won't. That's awesome. I think it's awesome.
Martin, I have a
Very good.
question about the Icarus satellite. And how do the tags differ from the MODIS tags?
Now I don't know the technical stuff. They must just send out a different type of signal.
They look pretty much the same and operate the same little harness and.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they have an elastic. Well, I haven't seen them yet, but the ones that we use for the MODIS network, you get really thin elastic cord, and you make sort of a figure 8. So there's a loop on either side, and the transmitter's in the middle, and you put one over each of the bird's legs, and so it sits right up over their hip bone, and then the transmitter just goes off the rump, like above the tail there. Those Icarus tags look like they have a shorter, like the antenna looks different. On ours, they're pretty bendy and they're longer, and those look shorter and stubbier. And they look thicker. I haven't held one yet to know, and I don't really know how the signals work, but they're similar. Same. I mean, for non-engineers, they're probably close enough to count as the same.
Usually a difference with satellite tags and nano tags, or the other ones like MODIS uses, is the power source. That the power source has never been able to get small enough to put on passerines or warblers, and that impacts the overall size. So generally satellite tags like Icarus would be bigger, but I think Icarus was sort of a technological leap with some of that. So I haven't seen one yet either. But I know it's considered somewhat of a breakthrough with satellite technology.
Yeah, the smaller radio tags, they just have an internal battery, and so they only work as long as the battery works, which varies a little bit depending on how big the tag is. But I gather they're about a year. And then if you think about the tags they're putting out on like the snowy owls, those have the solar panels, so you can recharge them, and those birds, can collect data for you for years. I assume the Icarus tags are too tiny to have a solar thing. I'm sure they have a battery.
They might, yeah. Actually, there's a new, is it CCT or CTT, who's doing these life tags that have solar capability. So they're a little bit bigger. They cost a little bit more, but they will last more than just that year of programming.
And the technology gets expensive. Like the MODIS tags, the little ones, I think they still cost like $70, $80 a pop.
At least, yeah.
The ones they're putting on snowy owls, I mean, weren't those like $1,500 or $2,000?
Yeah, they're more. I think they might be a little bit less than that, but Brinker, of course, would know. Any other questions for Maren? Well, Maren, this has certainly been a wonderful evening. Incredible presentation. There were a lot of comments in the chat thanking you for a great presentation. The question and answer, I think, was interesting just to see the types of questions. And I think there's a broad appreciation for all that you do and what you've been doing for years. And I anticipate at some point we will be back out on a field trip. It might not be for a year or so, but we will be back. And thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and insights with us tonight.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
And I will get this recording posted on the Anne Arundel Club YouTube channel. It sounds pretty professional. Hopefully I'll get that out there by tomorrow.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great evening. Have a great Thanksgiving.
much. Yes. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.